When did you start? 85, 86?
Yeah, I guess it would have been 86. When was that, December? Maybe it was 85.
Where was it at?
Back in Red Hall.
Yeah, that was about right. That lasted into early 86.
Yeah.
You got the one where they got shut down by the cops, or is that a later one?
No, this one was no incident.
Oh, okay.
Not a no negative incident.
Okay.
I always loved the Rankin shows because I didn't do them.
Yeah.
You know, just go like, help carry some gear, sing along.
It was close to my house. You could like walk there. What else are you gonna do when you're like 15?
It was 82, November of 82, when we saw dead bird bodies at the Teamsters Hall. And I think it would have been 83 where we saw Generic Society, Strolling Bones, at the Armory. Was it, who else played there? Oh man.
I think Anaco
Daco
played
Club.
that show or no?
No, I think it was a later show. But yeah, because we didn't play live until '84, so just hall shows and stuff. Kind of what Gary and Ty.
Well, yeah, like they were saying, 6 months in between, 3 months in between, that only allows for a couple shows for a whole year.
Well, and when there's only 4 or 5 bands playing
Right.
in the area, every show is 3 or 4 of those bands, like one sits out each show, but otherwise the flyers are all the same list of bands.
Yeah.
In '83, we were just recording our stuff back in Fenton.
Yeah, that's the year I graduated from high school, and yeah, there was definitely no live shows going on at that time for us anyways.
Just wanted to promote unity within the scene. There wasn't really that much fighting or anything anyways, but just kind of encouraging people to get together, get along, work together to make a decent Flint scene, which I doubt our song had anything to do with it, but I think for a while at least it kind of did happen.
So there wasn't really fighting between bands and all that?
Well, that's sort of the reason I got into shows, actually. I blame these guys. I went to Grand Blanc High School, and there were a bunch of punk kids there.
Bobcats, go Bobcats.
But there was nobody in bands. And I remember as early as like 80, 81, there were like fashion punks there that clearly were like Sex Pistols influenced. And by 83, I had friends listening to like Butthole Surfers and Black Flag, but we had no idea there were shows going on. And it was summer '84. The Prospect Hall show was the first one I went to that was the first Tempter show, and Dissonance, and that musical Suicide, that out-of-town band was on the bill. And then I got kicked out of Michigan State that summer, which was impressive because I wasn't actually at Michigan State yet. So I set a record and ended up registering at U of M Flint. And I think it was after I got to the 7-second show, and I saw the guys in the Guilties there, and Gary Mueller, who I'd recognized seeing him around campus just those first, couple weeks in September. And, went up and talked to him, and Dale Kriska was at U of M Flint, and Kirk Seaman and Larry Smiley, like all these guys all knew each other.
Right.
And, one of the first times I ever talked to him, these guys said, "Oh yeah, we're in this band, the Guilty Bystanders." And I said, "That's great, when can I come see you play?" "Well, we aren't really playing very much right now because the people booking the shows are more like in hardcore bands, and we're not a hardcore band." And me, having a big mouth then and still, said, "Well, just do your own show." I said, you gotta rent a hall and make flyers and get a PA system, and I said, "Well, that doesn't sound that hard." And John said, "Well, okay, then you do it." And I said, "Okay, I will." And so I've been to 2 shows in my life the first time I put on a show. And I think maybe for the first and last time I actually asked you guys if you wanted to play before just putting your name on the flyer and assuming you'd show up.
Yeah, but it works. So.
Yeah, being from Grand Blanc, we were not like I was the sheltered child or anything, but I was into the Stones and the Who and the Beatles, and a friend of mine who I went to school with, he said, "Well, I'm going to turn you on to this," and he loaned me Plasmatic's first album and The Decline, and after that it was like, this is cool,
What year did you graduate?
81. And and I'm trying to even remember the guy's name who loaned me the stuff, but I went right out to Ace Records and started buying punk stuff, and then heard about Punk Night or New Wave Night, whatever they wanted to call it, at Wild Bill's, and That's why I would see the Guilties, and wasn't that I disliked their music, just to look at them, I thought, these guys are so clean cut, this isn't punk, you know, and, I mean, I stayed for the whole show, but, like I said, after that, started going to more shows and getting to know these guys a little bit more, it was just, you know, it was a good scene to be in, cause going to Grand Blanc, I don't know how you fit in, but, you know, my family didn't have doctors and lawyers and car dealers, you know, so we were kind of the outcast family as it was, but, you know, just being around a bunch of people I kinda had, even I fit in better with them than my own family, you know? And that's always kind of what it's been like, you know, is just having this, people that kinda saw things on the same level you did, you know? So that was pretty cool to me, and all these years later, kicking myself now for ever having done it.
Well, I think Grand Blanc was like, you know, Gary Mueller talking about his older brothers in Swartz Creek, is I know people who had older brothers and sisters at Grand Blanc in like the mid and late 70s. And there was a start to people starting their own bands. Joe Benkert, my friend Amy's older brother, had a band called McCargo Cove. And then there were a couple other bands they were playing shows with. So, but it just took a while for people to get beyond that, you know, that we're gonna be the next Grand Funk Railroad attitude to, you know, maybe we should stop playing Grand Funk Railroad songs
Yeah.
and play our own.
Yeah.
You know, just, it took a while for that to catch up. So I think probably all over the county, you know, there were probably punk-ish bands in the 70s that never lasted long enough
Right.
to like go
To
out and play
flourish.
shows or
Yeah.
release anything or find
Yeah.
out about, you know, Ace Records or Wyatt Earp Records.
Johnny and the Rats actually comes to mind. I'm surprised that Gary didn't mention
Yeah.
it. John Mueller did this film project for his class back, this was like '78, I think.
Yeah.
And they did the song Might As Well Forget It. And that was on like Super 8mm film. And, you know, it was a little 3-minute thing where that's probably one of the first, you know, original punk songs that I'm aware of. And I don't know where that film is now, but I was lucky enough to get to see it. But yeah, like you said, there was like, but they didn't really go anywhere. It was just like this one project and that was it, I think.
Well, at a certain point, people started to, you know, realize that it didn't have to be about, you know, pursuing a model of success in music, or, you know, I mean, it's just something fun to do. If you're kind of disenfranchised, if you need something to do, it just comes down to having boredom on a Friday night that you must alleviate. You will find people to sit around and play records with, or to go out to a show with.
Yeah, both at the same time, to keep you out of trouble or to get you out of trouble.
Get
you
me
know?
get me into trouble, because I was, you know, I just moved back to Michigan, just started high school, had like no social network to speak of. I knew like a couple of guys, like, well, it was that show. It was
Yeah.
Brian Powers and Darren Berlin were like, you know, corruptors, you know. They were like older brother types that,
Yeah.
you know,
Where'd you go to high school at? Fire?
Ainsworth at the time, and then Carmen Ainsworth.
I think it kind of switched from, like, you know, we were talking about Cognito earlier, where for them, I think the music was a means to an end, you know, to have this, you know, rock star lifestyle or whatever, get fame or whatever. Whereas, you know, at a certain point, people just figured maybe the music should be it,
Yeah.
you know? It's like, and whatever happens,
Yeah,
happens,
let's
but
just do it.
it's not a means to an end, it's an end in itself.
Yeah.
Well, I think those early shows, it's hard to appreciate how hard it was. And I'm talking about the people doing shows before me. Like, you know, Phil and Tanya had started We Love You 2 Productions, and Doug Earp had been putting up the money for them to rent the hall, and you needed, you know, usually the deposit would be like a night's rent. It could be like a $300 deposit before you even, you know, open the doors, and then you'd make
Yeah.
flyers and come up with sound. And the thing that I figured out a couple years after I started was that doing 10 shows is not that much harder than doing one show. Because once you have a stage, once you have a sound system, once you have a regular venue, you know, then you're just doing the same thing over and over again, and it's sort of this system. But doing one show is an incredible amount of work. And, you know, like Gary was saying, you know, we got kicked out of halls for good reasons, for no reasons, we'd get thrown out, the maintenance people at Ukrainian Hall were basically stealing the deposit.
Yeah.
So every single show, they keep the deposit even if nothing went wrong.
Right.
And then if you'd say, well, I'm gonna complain to the people that own the hall, they'd say, go ahead, we'll just tell them everybody was doing coke in the bathroom and you'll never be able to book it
Right, you'll
again.
never come back.
Yeah.
And
Or tell them that the guy from the Amazing Front Hunks backed the car up to the door and was trying to asphyxiate everybody.
right, yeah, something crazy that could never have happened.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of hall show era that went through, like, probably '86. And the other thing too that when you think about those shows is, I mean, we were young, but we were young like 18, 19,
Yeah.
20 young,
Yeah.
and that's about, if you remember, that was the middle of the Reagan years, and Mothers Against Drunk Driving was becoming a force, and
Just Say No.
yeah, and so it went from the first shows I went to, the parking lot was full of people drinking, and there were, GIQs and
Yeah.
40
Yeah.
ounces all over, and pretty quickly over those couple of years, it became obvious that alcohol and fighting were big reasons why we kept getting thrown out of, venues, and really had to change gears and went to a no alcohol policy, which is what let us get into the Capitol Theater.
Right.
And, we're in the Capitol from '87, on and off for 7 years, which is definitely the longest run
And
we
that's-
ever
See
had.
a lot of the high school age kids to come, because I think there was you'd have to verify this for me, but I think there was a pretty big contingent of high school kids from Grand Blanc come out to see us play. Because I used to hear people say, yeah, you see Rocky Rules t-shirts in the halls at Grand Blanc High School, so that was definitely, it allowed the younger people to have something to do.
Yeah.
What year did MTV come out on the air?
81,
Yeah, because I remember people getting like cable. We went over to a neighbor's house to watch
yeah.
as MTV came on the air. But by '83, '84, MTV was a big like cultural phenomena, and enough people had cable
Right.
TV that seemed to change, and that's when a lot of younger, like high school age kids started coming down to the shows, and it seemed like Wyatt Earp was already fully established. Like all you had to do was go, and anything that was going on, any local release, any fanzine, any flyer was right there.
Yeah.
So you could walk out with 3 months worth of information and all the new music for, $8. And that's when the character changed. And I'm sure people from the generation older than us, the people that are doing shows in '81, '82, if they were being interviewed, they'd probably say, well, that's when everything got ruined. And you couldn't
Right.
even bring a 6-pack down to a show.
Right.
And, one little fight in the mosh pit and some broken bottles, and everybody makes a big deal out of it.
Well, and that's the thing, it's like, and that still went on, I mean, even into the late '80s, that was still, like go to Blair Kelly and you're gonna, you'll see sort of the, that ethic still being played out, but if not for, no booze, I mean, when you started booking shows, and, I mean, that's when, kids my age, kids that were still in high school, that was a complete paradigm shift, and, to think that, to consider that as any kind of ruination, I mean, that's when it flourished, in my estimation, and I don't think it's just because, it's relative to me. I think that's just the way it was.
I think it was summer of '86 when we realized the hall shows were not going to work, just bouncing around. Nobody could find out where they were. There was a lot of confusion, and that's when we did the Seafords Golf Course and had a really good arrangement. And the golf course people actually liked us because we were
Yeah.
paying rent for that unused
Right.
barn. We only lost the place because the parking wasn't correctly zoned, and the township ended up getting on them for parking in the road right of way. But the fact that we did 4 or 5 shows, and that we brought in Soulside, who was on Discord Records, we brought in the False Prophets, from New York City. We had a couple of big local shows, and we did 4 or 5 shows, and nothing got wrecked. The one incident I remember of drinking, of course, was Wiz, so nobody was surprised about that. And years and years after that, I got to be friends with this guy, Matt Leckie, who went to Swartz Creek schools. And he walked 6 miles one night
Yeah.
to go to one of those shows
Wow.
there because he'd heard about it and didn't know anybody going, and
Right.
he thought, that's the kind of thing we would have done then. You know, who would walk, you know, 6 hours, 2.5 hours before the show in Swartz Creek? He started, you know, hoofing it down Jennings
Wow.
Road or whatever
Okay.
to get there. Like that's the kind of commitment that, you know,
Yeah,
because
see,
it
because I
was,
felt lucky, especially where Seaford's is concerned, you know, because like, you know, like living on Reed Road and like, you feel far enough out, you know, it's like downtown, I can't get downtown, you know, oh, I got this, I can do this. It's just completely,
well, that's funny. Ty has the one of the flyers from the shoe store, you know, Drew Shoes across from the Capitol there, and those were. Is that 84? Those were going out
84,
as
yeah,
well,
'cause
and
we
that
were
was
playing some of those, yeah.
that was Mo Arvoy, whose mom
Jody.
Jody was at WFBE. His grandpa had owned Drew's shoe store, and I'm still not sure that he ever asked his family permission to use the building. Yeah, I get the sense it could have been one of those, hey Grandpa, my friends and I want to go poke around the shoe store, can we have a key? And then soon after there's 300 people in bands playing there. But, you know, downtown was crazy in 84, 85. You know, that's a lot more buildings than there are now, all of them empty. And, you know, the guy that had taken over the Capitol Theater, at least from the Farah family, was running like a speakeasy and brothel in the basement and had this like sketchy pinball arcade in the front corner where the Capitol Cafe ended up. You know, that was really just a front, and they were dealing out in there, and then you throw into that mix, you know, a couple hundred punk rock kids. And I just remember, we'd go downtown, there'd be shows, people would be parked all over, the Copa was going, so they'd have a crowd around the corner, and, you know, you'd be downtown on a crazy Friday night with like, you know, fights and cars driving the wrong way on one-ways and broken glass and buildings in flames, and you would never see a single cop.
Yeah.
You know, just, you know, like literally nobody cared, and that's what gave us the idea of doing the Capitol Theater, was after Seaford's Golf Course fell through, you know, which was summer of '87, we did those, was
Something,
then,
right, yeah.
we went to U of M Flint with a girl who had dated the Troy Fair that ran the Capitol for his dad, and she said, well, you should go down and talk to Troy about the Capitol. And I remember he showed us the theater, you know, 2,000 seats.
Yeah.
He showed us the upstairs, and the elevator didn't work, and I thought about like lugging gear up 3 flights of stairs, and then I was like, I can't believe in this giant building, there was, you know, we just need like this empty box, and he said, well, I could show you the basement, but there's no way, you know, you want to do anything there. And we walked down these nice double extra wide stairs, and it turns, and you're in this big, you know, concrete box, and I was like, oh, perfect.
Yeah.
You want that?
Our own cabin club.
And, yeah, you played one of the first shows, or the
Yeah.
first show, right,
Yeah.
with Nixon declares Manson guilty.
Yeah, or was it White Collar Crime by that time?
No, I think it was Nixon declares, and that was October of '87, because that's when Brandon Jubar from CDG was helping out, and the Muellers had been providing PA gear for shows for
Right.
years for anybody that asked.
Yeah.
Those
the big
the
Suns.
giant sun cabinets that
Yeah.
filled the entire back of Gary's station wagon.
Yeah.
So he had to make 2 trips to Swartz Creek every time.
Remember when he used to drive that Festiva? Grab all that stuff on a little Festiva. Oh my god. Yeah, times were nuts back then. We could do just about anything now. Well, we still would do just about anything to play a show now, you know, and we have, so.
I think it's interesting, just, you know, from having been around shows for about 25 years now, is that even by the, not late 80s, but by the early 90s, you know, when the Guilty Bystanders were like one of the, you know, grand old bands of the scene, there were already kids in bands then, you know, and I heard disparaging comments made about grunge earlier, which are probably totally fair, but at the same time, it really drew a stark line that there had been those blurred lines about what was punk, and after the grunge came out, that line appeared again, and it's, if you want to be on MTV and playing arena concerts, then you know you're not on the punk side of the line. And I remember bands like, you know, DC Bob and Ninja High School and the Rugby Mothers, you know, sort of saying, well, what's wrong with being the Guilty Bystanders? and having your own life, but playing shows, loving the music that you make, you know, making people happy, putting out a release every year or two, you know, selling tapes and T-shirts, like that became sort of one of the aesthetics that drove like this whole side of what was going on in shows. And the same thing going on was when Repulsion had broken up, but then Relapse Records re-released that, you know, the full CD, and they went and played some shows again. So it was just sort of, there was this range of possibilities for kids again, and the Capitol Theater was a nice stable spot for shows.
Yeah.
You know, and everything got easier. Getting T-shirts made, you could send out a cassette and get them, you know, 100 copies done more cheaply instead of making
One at a time.
6 copies of Inflatable Party Sheep and then getting mad because the master broke and not making any more.
Yeah, and then trying to get the Xerox to work right, and cut them out and fold them up. Oh man, pain in the ass. Especially trying to piece it all together, you know, you get the spine, then you fold it, it's upside down, the writing's upside down what you wanted it.
Labor intensive.
Yeah,
And we were definitely not the most,
ambitious.
yes,
Lot.
motivated.
It's,
Yeah.
it's crazy, but there have probably been way more downloads of Inflatable Party Sheep on TakeNoPrisoners.info than there ever were copies sold
Oh,
at
yeah.
shows or at Wyatt Earp Records.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which is a good thing, because we don't have to do anything. We just, it's
Right.
there, and if somebody wants it, there it is.
Yeah, I remember going into Wyatt Earp Records many times, I think went back when we were doing Broccoli Rules was the one that we're selling, and Doug would be sold out. It's like, you gonna bring us any more tapes? And it's like, yeah, we'll get around to that eventually. You know, and yeah, we were really bad at keeping them supplied, and then when we came up with the Broccoli Rules T-shirts, they sold out rather quickly. And we were like, yeah, we should probably, you know, make more of those, because that's probably the only thing that we ever sold that we made any kind of a profit on.
Who did that artwork? What's his name?
Scott Frey.
That's right.
A guy I went to high school with, classmate of mine, and talented as heck, and people love the shirts, and we were just like, yeah, we really need to get around to making more of those. And
We should do that, yep.
just, we were not the
Right
ones to
after
get
Ed
that
City
done.
4 comes out.
Yeah.
With the next issue of Edge City, we'll put
Well, I remember when John made the mistake of coming in to U of M Flint and saying, we got those Broccoli Rules T-shirts. And Gary Mueller and I made him walk right out to his car and pulled out the cash and bought them on the spot. It's a good thing we did. We might never have got one. Yeah, you know, it wasn't the music, which is probably
the
different.
money.
Yeah, it was the money.
You'd get bands like us to play for free.
I paid you every penny you were worth.
That's so
No,
sad.
Always
I
got you
said-
there.
I just split $5 4 ways.
In the, like I said, in the early '80s, I had friends getting all excited about all this music, and you know, MDC, Butthole Surfers, all the West Coast bands, and it didn't really do that much for me. And so I listened to a bunch of these bands, but I can still remember walking into Prospect Hall in summer of '84, and I think it was $2.50 admission. And so I was with, you know, a few of these guys I'd skateboarded with, and Tempter had literally just started. Like they were starting their first song as we got to the door. Tempter went on to become Repulsion. And I like sort of paid my $2.50, and I got my hand stamped. I think Phil was sitting at the door at the time. And I took 2 steps in, and it just felt like home. You know, there's this band on that, you know, aside from the Judas Priest style metal spike bracelets, you know, with like jean jacks on, like looked like people I knew, and I was surrounded with all these like people, and it was like if you took the few people from Grand Blanc High School that would have been into that, and the few people from Fenton, and the few from Carmen Ainsworth, and you threw them all in the same room. And I think everybody there felt like it was home for whatever reason. I mean, I probably knew less than 10 people in the room. And Prospect Hall was about exactly the size of this space. And it was the crowd and the energy and the activity there that mattered to me a lot more than the music. I think Guilty Bystanders were probably the first local band that I really got into. And there have been a lot since then, you know, that you know, I still listen to a lot of old music, probably more than I do of new bands. And we started bringing in out-of-town bands that people wanted to see, and in some cases like the Crucifix and Angry Red Planet. were bands I
bands.
really liked, you know, but, you know, like Black Flag, I mean, they put on a great show, but they didn't do that much for me. You know, Suicidal Tendencies I never really liked, you know, and then some
We
of the.
never liked Flint.
Yeah,
That sounds the interview
exactly.
that they did.
So I think it was the idea that, you know, I knew I didn't have a voice to sing. I didn't have the skill and or patience to play an instrument.
Never stopped us.
I wasn't a great writer, you know, I have a terrible ear and couldn't run sound. And so all these people were sort of putting in and doing what they could do. And the one thing that was left that nobody had really stepped up to sort of take ownership of was the, you know, the drudge work of putting the shows together, and then like the sheer unmitigated joy of seeing a couple hundred people watching bands and knowing that I had some part in like bringing that together. So I was never on the stage with an instrument, but if I hadn't put in some of the work I did, they wouldn't have been either. And when I think about all the nights, you know, sitting at home during high school thinking, God, there's gotta be something better than this to do. You know, knowing that even though I didn't get to do that, that generations of kids would, you know, that's the part that I found really gratifying.
And then I concur, because, you know, we've made the case that we were very lazy, and if Joel hadn't done a lot of the work
Yeah,
to
man.
put
Yeah,
these
probably
shows
never would've
together.
played.
Yes, literally probably would have never ever
Yeah.
played again, because nobody's putting on a show. I guess that's it for us as a band, so.
As I recall, it was Phil and Tanya were putting on a lot of shows about the time that you started. How did that switch off happen, or was there any
Yeah,
conflict?
you know, I think Phil and Tanya had been around long enough that, you know, they were close with Doug. And I think We Love You Too Productions had a very specific goal of bringing in regional and national touring bands that people wanted to see. And they have this amazing history. I mean, you look at the flyers and they did, you know, Raw Power and DRI and Corrosion of Conformity and, you know, Slayer, you know, at a $5 show, and 7 Seconds a couple times, Black Flag a couple times. And, you know, so that part of it, seeing all those bands in these tiny rooms, you know, for $5 was amazing. But I remember being at like those Black Flag shows, and I think Dissonance opened one, but the other two, the opening bands were Black Flag's roadies.
Yeah.
And it was just one of the, and, you know, just Tom Tricoli's Dog, you know, just these SST, you know, hair in front of the face,
Sinusitis.
grinding away, exactly. I just, musically I hated it, and I hated the idea that we're in Ukrainian Hall in Flint, Michigan, and there's 300 people from Flint, Michigan coming out,
And not one Flint band.
and nobody from
Yeah.
Flint on the stage. And so, you know, I didn't start doing shows to compete with Phil and Tanya. I loved their shows. You know, I missed the first one because I wasn't going to shows then. I never missed another. But I wanted to see the Rokers and CDG and the Evil Clowns and Nixon Declares Manson Guilty and Guilty Bystanders and Political Silence and all these friends of mine, because I had this idea then, and I have it still, that the talent and songwriting ability and stage presence of these bands in Flint was as good as anything we were paying more to bring in from out of town, but they were from LA or New York or places where if you were in that band, you were in the right spot to maybe have a chance to
Right.
get signed. And not to put down those bands, because at the same time, you know, we just missed out on booking Husker Du. We almost had a replacement show for $500. We had the Minutemen and Billy Bragg booked, you know, before D. Boone died in a car accident, like at a tentative date. You know, so there were these great bands from out of town that we would have loved to see as well. But, you know, I'd stack up the talent in Flint against any other scene, you know, at the time. And so that's what I wanted to do was to put local bands on stage. And I think, you know, Phil and Tanya, the shows they did in a way were a lot more stressful than mine, you know, because these out-of-town bands had guarantees and they borrowed money from Doug Earp, you know, to sort of put the money down on the hall.
And hope to recoup that.
Yeah, and so it was just tough. And, you know, I was this new kid that had just showed up. And I remember when it sort of came to the point where I was doing shows and Jeff Mintline and Chuck McLaren and the Poli Sci guys, you know, were doing Rankin Rental Hall mostly and some other shows. And, you know, there's some people doing some stuff at Blair Kelly. And I think Phil and Tanya just said, okay, you know, we did our job. There was nothing going on. We helped create this huge amount of energy. And now there's plenty of shows we can concentrate on being in a band, and that's the other part of it is you know, I joke about like Edge City 4 never coming out and all these other side projects, and I think that with, you know, the financial state that most of us were in, you know, like our scene wasn't a bunch of rich kids, you know, we didn't ask mom and dad for money, we had barely working vehicles or none at all. You could really only do one thing well, and you know, like I mean, John and Steve could have been the one that put on shows, but it sure would have hurt the Guilty Bystanders and been less practice time and less time to, you know, put cassettes together. You know, anybody could have done any of that because it's, you know, it's not rocket science. But I decided at some point I'm just going to do one thing and do it as well as I can, and that was the shows, and that meant, you know, not the fanzine and not getting a radio show and not doing any number of other things, you know, not picking up an instrument, but just doing shows. I think after every single show, shoving the last of the sound gear into Gary's car, you know, and everybody would be long gone, and you know, a few of the diehards would be there helping push brooms around to clean up, and somebody would be in the bathroom trying to fix the broken sink, you know, with tools, and I'd say, oh my, I'm never doing this again. And then a couple weeks later, after coming into school and having people say how much fun they had at the show, and you know, how great the Guilty set was, and did you hear that new song, and then you'd start, you know, getting bored and say, well, you know, I wonder if that guy at Ukrainian Hall is still pissed at us. You know, he probably wants
Have
the
another
money.
go around at that, yeah.
And you know, and Doc Dark called, and the Crucifix would like to come back and play, and so you just do it all over again. And I think the fact that there were these other shows going on, you know, is you know, in the middle of all this, I could go to Rankin Rental Hall, and you know, help carry some Guilty Bystanders gear, or help sit at the door, like help sell T-shirts or something, but not have to sweat it, and then realize everybody else had the same headaches and the same trouble.
Right, there's a certain point, like once it's seeded, it's sort of, you know, self-generating, it sort of, you know, moves on the steam of the people that are around you, and like you said a minute ago about focusing on doing one thing and doing it well, you know, well, so what about the radio show, you know? Somebody's got that covered. There's a zine, there's, you know, there's a record store, there's like, you know, everybody's kind of doing their part, and it works. I mean, it worked better than, you know, like you said, I'm sure there were some really frustrating points, but you've always gotten feedback that, you know, kept you doing it, so.
Right, and despite all the ups and downs and getting kicked out of venues, it was knowing that those like moments of like magic were possible at every show. And you know, it's a drag to walk out of the show at the end of the night, well, run out of the show in the middle and go over to the ATM and take out all the money you have left and run back so you can like pay the bills. And you know, so 35 people come to a show, but you know, the Guilties and plenty of other bands, if it's 30 people or 300 people, they played their set, they put on their show, and you would never know from the performance on stage. And you know, looking through some of Ty's pictures, there's a shot of the Guilties playing. I have no idea what show it was, but you know, we just sat there and identified everybody in view up at the stage. You know, and there's Miriam and Megan and Willow, and there's Biff, and you know, there's all these people, and it might have been a really small crowd, but we're all packed up at the stage, singing along on all the choruses, and probably having an absolute blast. And that's one of those things that, you know, once we started doing more shows, having a couple of shows that nobody comes out to wasn't a disaster, because the landlord knows that you're gonna have a bigger show down the road somewhere and catch up on the rent. And once we started doing regular shows, there went from being 4 or 5 bands in Flint to 7 or 8, to a dozen, to 20. And then you sort of had to do shows just to check people out and see if they were any good, and see if they were nice guys or fun to work with, or if they drew anybody. And if they met any of those criteria, then you'd start putting them on bigger shows and figuring out, you know, who those like scene staples were gonna be. I found a flyer, it was Capitol Theater 91 maybe, and it was DC Bob, Mondo Connie, and Rugby Mothers. And I think Rugby Mothers in Mondo County was both their first show in Flint, because we couldn't find anybody else to play.
Yeah, that was the first Mondo County.
And those two bands turned into like staples of the Flint scene for years and years afterwards, because they had that one show, you know, to show what they could do. The only times that I really just was completely discouraged and disheartened was in the late '80s, when there was that like boom and sort of Nazi skinhead behavior, and it was part just the principle of it, and part because some of these were kids that we knew that had come to the shows, and one show they'd be there with a skateboard and their hair hanging in front of their face and a Suicidal Tendencies shirt on, and the next show they'd be there with boots and braces and a white power t-shirt and a shaved head, like flicking a switch. And there were some shows there where you know, Myron got intentionally hit in the face by one of the skins and got his nose broken, and there were a couple incidents of like white power graffiti, and that's when you want to just throw it all in and say, screw it, you know, it's not worth it. And then 2 seconds later you think, I am not going to let these, you know, ignorant
vocal minority.
knuckleheads, you know, ruin all the good that all these other people have in them. And you know, there was some scary stuff at the time, and I think any number of us might like literally have the scars to prove it. But I remember this kid that I really liked, Steve, and he was one of those guys that came to one of the Capitol shows early, '87 or '88, and had a flight jacket on with some sort of white power patch. And I grabbed him and shoved him right up against the wall and pulled out my Swiss Army knife and literally cut that patch off of his flight jacket. And I said, I know there's guys that are too stupid to know this is a bad idea, but I know better with you. I didn't see him for 10 years. 10 years later, I run into him at Churchill's, and I'm shooting pool, and he comes up and he says, you remember me? And I was like, great. 10 years later, this guy's gonna kick my ass. Shakes my hand, buys me a beer, and thanks me, and says, you know, he didn't think anybody cared. These skinhead guys at least talked to him. It seemed like an identity, and just knowing, like, heading off, who knows what his life could have been like, you know, like, that makes up for getting, you know, punched in the eye a couple times.
And Steve,
I made millions. Millions and millions, hookers and blow.
It shows that the plastic surgery, all the work he's had done.
No, I think any criticism is fair. Everybody was there. We all have our own like picture of what it was like. One of the things that we learned later with Flint Local 432 was we made everything public. So we had a sheet of paper for every night that listed all the bands, that said who played, how much they got paid, how much were flyers, how much was rent, you know, and you know, people would just come and look at it if they had a question about what was going on at the show. I think in the early days, you know, it was so convoluted. You'd be handing somebody a wad of money for flyers they got. Duggar put up all the money for the deposit at the first shows, and there wasn't really a system to make clear where the money came and went out. You know, I guess the only thing I'd say by way of defense is that while I was doing shows, you know, I didn't own a car until I was, I think, in my early 30s, and I lived in an apartment that had no heat in the winter. So, and I've never had a drug habit. So if there was money, I'm not sure where it went. And when the local got shut down the first time, that's when I realized I was actually making money, you know, with my day job. I was just spending it all on the shows, and I was able to like get a car, I bought a house, and then I started doing shows again, and I've been broke ever since. So it's just, it's one of those things that there are always people that their punk rock ethic says that, you know, when you get to the end of the night, every penny that came in should be gone. And, you know, we tried to set up a system that would get us through a couple of shows with 30 or 40 people until the next show that had 250. But like I said, you know, there were a few people, the guys in the Guilties and the Muellers that were...
Yeah, we never cared. You know, I mean, we make fun of the whole thing, and but we didn't give a shit. It was a night out for us too. You know, we got to come out and be the center of attention for an hour and a half or however long, whatever, you know. And the money was never an issue with us. I mean, yeah, it'd be great if we had money to, you know, pay for the gas that we spent getting there or whatever, but I didn't really care. I was going out, you know, I might as well truck all my shit out there and play, cause I'm going out to see whoever's playing anyways.
Right, right.
So-
Might as well throw your head in to be a part of it.
And, you know,
And I-
and if there was a show where, you know, there were like 20 people there, it's like not like we would expect, you know, like $100 paycheck when
Yeah.
we're done, you know,
Yeah.
it's like we could
You know,
figure that out.
Yeah, yeah.
And, I mean, but I think Joel paid me back anyways, give me that Apollo 11 newspaper and all those NASA records, so,
Yeah.
so it's like I paid in full, it's like,
Well, that's kind of too, like, you know, being so instrumental as you were in booking shows, it's like, it's just the natural flip side of the coin is like, you're the lightning rod for the naive. I mean, and I was in, you know, to kind of address your question, is like, I was in bands with people, you know, who will go nameless that, you know, well, what the fuck, you
You'll tell
know,
me later.
I got $5 and, oh boy, have a nice time in Scotland, Joel. You know what I mean? It's like, it's the flip side of the coin, like, you're the lightning rod, like, people would just imagine, like, you reaping all that, you know, it's like, you're not taking into account, you know, money in, money out, there's a whole convoluted,
Right.
you know, it's
Well,
a lot of work and a lot of complexity to
And I
book a
think,
show and.
I think the other thing that a couple people in particular lost sight of was, you know, this isn't like McDonald's where I bought the franchise rights to do concerts in Flint. You know, everybody else that was doing shows that started or stopped at any time quit of their own volition because to them, the lack of money and amount of hassle wasn't worth it.
Right.
And I just never learned any better. And, you know, I was joking about it with Chris Everson earlier, that, you know, and Chris has been involved helping put on the shows since like 87, 88, and right up to today. And, you know, like every year, like clockwork, some group of kids comes out of nowhere and explains to us that they feel bad, but they're gonna have to put the local out of business. And we say, well, great, if you need any tips on that, let us know, because we've made all the mistakes and can tell you. But, you know, the fact that you look around Genesee County and there's, you know, what, 300 or 400 bars in Genesee County that are making money and 0 all-ages clubs, tells you something about the economics of doing all-ages shows. And I think some of that was, people say, well, you know, I can play Conos and make $150 and I come to the Capitol and we make $30. I was like, well, yeah, because we're not selling overpriced Bud Light at the Capitol. You know, there's no other source of income, and it's sort of borne out because, you know, the complaints haven't changed, the people making them have. And the local, we left the Metropolis building 2.5 years ago, and we did some shows at a Masonic Temple for a while, and had some money issues there with a couple of people and stopped doing shows. And since then, there have been no shows. And my guess is there will be no shows until we get the local open in the new space, at which point people can once again tell us they're gonna put us out of business.
Right.
So, you know, if I did make money, I wish I knew where it went, but I certainly don't begrudge anybody's complaints about me. You know, there are bands that had beefs because they thought they were playing too early on the bill, or too late on the bill, or their name wasn't big enough on the flyer, or their set wasn't long enough. When I started doing shows, there were certainly some bands that didn't understand why I didn't book them all the time. And, you know, like, you know, The Rub, who I enjoyed seeing live as long as my ears could take it, but I only booked them a couple times, because they were a lot older than us. They didn't really have anything musically in common with the bands that I was interested in seeing and booking, and I didn't want to book shows with people that I knew were gonna be a problem, because they wouldn't sort of recognize the no alcohol policy. You know, they were prone to like causing fights, and you know, they can always do their own shows. So it's, I think it's one of those things that those complaints are probably part of what helps keep the shows honest.
Well, complainers complain, and if you know, in this kind of environment, if you look for a problem, you're gonna find it. Especially if you know, attach your mentality to, you know, money and what the end result is, and, you know, whatever, you know.
Steve just found out he's not getting paid for this interview.
Yeah.
He's out of here.
I mean, it was kind of similar to the early days in the punk movement, where, you know, if somebody complained about, oh, we don't like your music or whatever, it's like, write something better, you know,
Yeah.
fuck it, you know,
Yeah,
it's like,
I'm not stopping you.
yeah, it's like, go do what, the way it should be, you know?
Yeah, why do you keep showing up at my
Yeah.
shows to tell me you don't like our stuff?
Yeah.
Well, in part because of takenoprisoners.info and making connections with friends on, you know, Facebook and MySpace. You know, the one thing that I realize is everything else being equal, you know, whatever I put into the scene in Flint, I have gotten back, you know, many, many times over. And, you know, I really can't even imagine what my life would have been without, you know, running into John and Steve and the guys from the Guilties and Poli Sci at U of M Flint. And
Vice versa, I mean.
you know, and for better or worse, you know, I don't necessarily want to be 42 looking back and saying, you know, my life's work was putting on these punk rock shows, because I think that really like sort of undersells how important they were to so many people, me included. And as part of getting ready for reopening Flint Local 432, which is just, you know, the latest name for what was the Fallout Shelter and Rust Belt
Yeah.
Productions and all these other names, we sort of put out an email call that we're continuing, that we you know, people say, what can we do to help the local? And so we're working on grants right now, so if you want to write in and just tell us, what did the local mean to you? And email after email showed up, and people talked about like meeting their husbands and wives, and getting, you know, opportunities to play in bands and to travel, and people talking about how much it changed their lives on a personal basis. And a guy just wrote in and said, you know, before he came to the local, he was going down a slippery slope into progressively more heavier drug use, but the local being drug and alcohol free, he had to make a choice. And you know, those are the kinds of things that I don't need too many kids to tell me, you know, it was tough in the mid-'80s being straight edge because everybody was drinking, but we were able to say, but Joel is straight edge, so it can't be that bad, you know. A few of those stories and all the other BS that went with putting on shows is work. Yeah, I think there was a couple things there is, you know, I'm sure part of me shooting my mouth off on the mic was just motivated by pure jealousy, you know. You know, when I was on the mic telling about the upcoming shows, nobody was stage diving or singing along with the lyrics like all these guys have felt being in bands. You know, so it was probably a little bit just selfish wanting people to know I was the one that had something to do with the show. And it was, I remember that period, and it was like starting to try and build this culture to bridge the gap from the 80s shows, which was definitely like a very private club. It was hard to find out about and hard to get into and difficult to keep track of what was going on, to make it, you know, more marketable and more accessible, knowing that there were all sorts of kids out there that would love coming to the shows if they could just find out about them. And then once kids came down, I mean, I remember I spent a lot of time during shows, if I saw a couple of kids in the corner or somebody standing by themselves not talking to anybody, I always went up and introduced myself, found out what high school they were from, what band they were into, and lots of times it was that kid that was brave enough to find a flyer at a record store and come down, but I knew from when I felt like that they would never be back if they didn't make a connection somewhere. And so it would be figuring out what they were into and saying, oh, you know what? You know, there's a kid making a fanzine. I bet they'd love to have somebody write record reviews. You know, or, you know, Dave Gebhardt's a photographer, and this is Dave and his friend Matt. And try and like bring them in part because that added to the shows, and in part because they'd come down the next week and pay their $5, but also because I knew then that I was not smart enough to look at somebody and know what kind of potential they had. You know, I couldn't look and say, well, they're probably not in a band, they're probably not a great artist, they're probably not one of these things. I always thought every single kid there could benefit by coming to those shows, and whether it was starting, you know, the group of kids that started the Green Panther Party and did environmental awareness kind of things, or the fanzines that came out, or kids with a little movie camera that were making their own films. you know, is to draw out that potential. And, you know, at the point we stopped doing that as much was when the shows had just sort of picked up their own momentum, and it felt like it wasn't as necessary. And my entire adult life has just been periods of being really excited about the shows and periods of being really burned out. And really, it's just been these last few years that I know what I got from the shows. Lately, I've realized what I missed from the shows. And, you know, I have a grown-up job now here at U of M Flint. I have an amazing girlfriend that I've been with for 3.5 years. And, you know, you can imagine what it's like to be young and single and find somebody you're interested in and say, you know, I would love to go out with you, but Friday and Saturdays are off limits because I've got these concerts I put on. You know, so I feel so terrible for the amazing women I dated in the 90s, you know, because they got like 10% of me.
Yeah.
And so who knows what that could have led to. You know, it's all, like I said, it's all worked out for the best because I love my job, I love the work we do here at Launch, I love my girlfriend, but even knowing how well my life is going without the local open right now, I'm also really missing the idea that there's not a place for the next Guilty Bystanders. Well, for a long time, I've been the old man that writes the checks to make sure the bills get paid. And to be honest, at those early shows, you know, the reason I was standing out in the middle was we had that continual struggle with making sure we didn't have a mosh pit that would get people hurt. And so by standing in the middle, you know, we got to be like the pit police. And I know Dale Kriska would be out there at times, and Brandon Jubar and Chris Everson, you know, and it was, you know, it's more art than science looking at this like massive humanity and figuring out who's like crossing that line. But I felt like the local would not have survived a serious injury. And the more steady and public and secure we got with the Capitol Theater space, the more sort of fragile that became because, you know, one thing in the newspaper, you know, one really angry parent who was a lawyer, and it all would have gone away. And so a lot of that was a genuine interest in the bands, but also making sure that people didn't cross that line and that people didn't get hurt.
And that's another thing, you know, in the early days, you know, the pit, you know, wasn't that bad as people would kind of, you know, gently nudge each other and stuff and like
pogo around a bit.
Yeah, and then, you know, if somebody fell, they, you know, help them back up. But you know, later on, I think, you know, a lot of
Yeah, you get guys on the peripheral waiting for somebody to come along so they could, you know, come
Yeah.
and sucker punch them and.
yeah, so I think a lot of jocks would come out there and think, oh, this is cool, you
Yeah.
know, I'll hit
Yeah.
people. It's like,
Yeah.
you know, they didn't get
We're
the
going
whole,
queer stomping
Yeah.
type of thing.
yeah, they
you know?
didn't get the whole
I blame
idea.
MTV.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. I mean, you know, people think, oh, this is what punk's about. They had no idea.
Right, it's people who'd never been to a show before and heard about it and thought, oh yeah, that's where they have that slam dancing where you go and punch people.
Or
And
they watch
literally-
Quincy, you know, and think, oh, that's what it's
Yeah.
all about. I'll go do that.
I remember, you know, quite a few times that kind of crap going on, and I don't know, I'm lucky I didn't get arrested a few times.
I just think it's funny that, like, you know, I was like literally the skinniest guy there, and I'd be dragging these
What about
big
him?
monsters off of each other.
Yeah.
And years later, somebody's like, man, you must like really know how to take care of yourself if you like dive into that. And I was like, no, but I got Steve Reddy and Dale and all these guys standing behind me that I know are gonna have my back if, you know, somebody throws a punch.